See? Just an old watch.
Then why is it this heavy? This was built to hide something. Then let's find out why.
What did your father leave you?
Proof.
Robert Williams, 42, maintenance supervisor at the Hilton downtown Chicago. People believed he was a quiet man living off his wife's success. They thought he lacked ambition, that he settled for less. He drove a worn 2012 Ford Fusion, ate lunch alone beside humming boiler pipes, wore the same scratched steel watch every day. What they didn't know was that watch was never just a watch. The moment Ava laughed and dropped it onto the dealer's metal tray, the sharp clink echoed. Robert's fingers curled into a fist, and he didn't blink. If you're watching this, drop your country and local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow burn stories with real consequences, consider subscribing. This one only gets deeper from here. The first time Ava Williams introduced Robert to her colleagues at Caldwell and Pierce LLP, she didn't say his name right away. She said his job. He works in maintenance, she told them, smiling over the rim of a crystal glass filled with Sauvignon Blanc. At the Hilton. Keeps the building running. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. Then came the nods, the polite ones, the kind that ended conversations before they began. Robert stood beside her, one hand resting loosely in his pocket, the other holding a glass he hadn't touched. He noticed the small things. He always did. The way Daniel Brooks shifted his stance slightly away from him. The way Lisa Grant's smile tightened when she realized Robert had heard. It wasn't new. It had been happening for years. Back when Ava and Robert first met, none of this existed. She was still a junior associate, working late, taking on cases nobody wanted, eating takeout at 11 p.m. in a cramped apartment in Logan Square. Robert was different then, too. He worked long hours at a small mechanical repair shop off West Division Street. Grease under his nails, calluses on his hands. But he had his own rhythm, his own confidence. They met at a hardware store. Ava had no idea how to fix a leaking sink. Robert explained it in less than 3 minutes, using a broken valve and a piece of paper towel as an example. She laughed. He didn't. She liked that. Back then she said he was grounded. Back then she said she needed someone like him. That was before promotions, before bonuses, before the firm moved her into a corner office overlooking the Chicago River. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, quiet, like pressure building behind glass. The first sign came with the bank account. Ava insisted they merge finances after her second promotion, said it made things simpler. Robert didn't argue. He rarely did. But the account was in her name. The credit cards, too, just easier for tax purposes, she said. Robert nodded. Months later, he noticed something else. Every purchase he made gas groceries tools was questioned. Do you really need that, she would ask. He stopped explaining. Then came the parties. At first, Ava brought him along because she wanted to. Then she brought him because it was expected. Then she brought him because it would look strange if she didn't. Each time, Robert wore the same dark blazer, the one that fit just well enough to pass, the same polished shoes, the same watch. The watch never changed. It was scratched along the edges. The leather strap had been replaced twice. The face had a faint discoloration near the 6 o'clock mark. Ava noticed. Why do you still wear that thing, she asked one night, standing in front of the mirror in their downtown apartment on North Wabash Avenue. Robert adjusted his cuff. It was my father's. That doesn't make it valuable. He didn't respond. She turned to him, arms crossed. You know what people see when they look at you, right? Robert met her eyes. He didn't ask. They see a man who refuses to move forward. Silence. Ava shook her head, reached for her coat. I'm trying to help you, Robert, but you have to meet me halfway. He nodded. He always nodded. At the Hilton, nobody asked those questions. The building had its own language. Boilers, valves, electrical panels humming behind locked doors, systems that either worked or didn't. No gray area, no judgment. Robert preferred that. He arrived at 6:30 every morning, checked the maintenance logs, walked the floors, listened. He could tell if something was wrong before anyone reported it. A faint vibration in a pipe, a shift in temperature, a sound slightly off rhythm. People trusted him there, not because of titles, because things worked when he was around. At lunch, he sat in the maintenance room, a narrow space behind the service elevator. Metal shelves lined with tools, a folding chair, a small table with a dent on one side. He unwrapped his sandwich. Turkey, whole grain bread, always the same. The watch rested on his wrist. Sometimes he would glance at it longer than necessary, not checking the time, just looking. Ava hated that watch. Not because it was ugly, not entirely, because it didn't fit the image she was building. At Caldwell and Pierce, image was currency. Partners wore tailored suits, Swiss watches, shoes that never creased. They spoke in measured tones, negotiated in millions, closed deals in rooms with glass walls and controlled lighting. Robert didn't belong in that world, and Ava knew it. She stopped introducing him by name altogether. At a dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse, Daniel Brooks leaned over the table cutting into a perfectly cooked ribeye. "So, Robert," he said, not looking up, "you ever think about doing something else?" Robert took a sip of water. "Like what?" Daniel shrugged. "Something more aligned with Ava's trajectory." Ava laughed softly. "He's comfortable where he is." Robert set the glass down. Comfortable doesn't mean incapable. Daniel glanced up then, briefly, studied him, then smiled. "Of course." The conversation moved on, but the word stayed, incapable. It followed Robert home, sat with him in the quiet of the apartment, echoed in the space between Ava's phone calls and late-night emails. One evening, Ava returned from work later than usual. He was in the kitchen fixing a loose cabinet hinge. She placed her bag on the counter. "We have a client dinner tomorrow night. Penthouse at Trump Tower." Robert tightened the screw. "What time, 7?" He nodded. She hesitated. "Try to wear something better." He looked up. "This is fine." She glanced at his watch. "Just leave that at home." Robert didn't answer. The next evening, the penthouse was already full when they arrived. Glass walls, city lights stretching out beneath them, the river cutting through the skyline like a dark ribbon, voices layered over soft jazz, laughter that came a second too loud. Robert stood near the edge of the room, fingers resting lightly against the cold glass. He could see reflections, not just of the city, of himself. Same blazer, same posture, same watch. Behind him, Ava moved through the crowd with ease. Handshakes, names, smiles that shifted depending on who she faced. At one point, she turned back toward him. Her eyes lingered on his wrist. A flicker of something passed across her face. Annoyance. Then she looked away. Robert followed the movement of the room, watched how people positioned themselves, who leaned in, who stepped back. Patterns. There were always patterns. He didn't drink, didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't interrupt. But he noticed. He noticed Marcus Hale before anyone introduced him. Mid-40s, crisp suit, subtle watch on his wrist. Not flashy, expensive. The kind of man who didn't need to say what he did. Ava walked him over. "Marcus specializes in luxury timepieces," she said almost casually. Robert's eyes dropped briefly to Marcus's wrist, then back up. Marcus smiled. "Collector," he corrected. Ava laughed. Same difference. Her hand moved then, without asking, without hesitation. She reached for Robert's wrist, and this time he didn't pull away. Robert did not stop Ava's hand. That was the part that lingered. Not the laughter. Not Marcus Hale's polite, practiced smile. Not even the quiet shift in the room as attention turned toward the watch. It was the absence of resistance. Ava's fingers closed around his wrist, cool and firm. She slid the watch loose with a smooth motion, as if it had always belonged to her. Robert let it happen. From the outside, it looked like submission. Another quiet concession from a man who had made a habit of giving ground. But inside, something else moved. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. The weight leaving his wrist felt wrong. Not emotionally, physically. He noticed it immediately. The absence of pressure. The slight imbalance in how his arm hung at his side. That weight had been constant for 22 years, since the day his father handed it to him. The memory didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, like reflections in broken glass. A hospital room in Evanston. Pale walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, machines humming in slow, steady intervals. Thomas Williams lay in the bed thinner than Robert remembered. His hands still strong, though, still precise. He didn't waste words. He never had. Robert stood beside him, not knowing where to look. His father reached toward the small metal tray on the bedside table, picked up the watch, turned it over once in his hand. There was a pause. Then he held it out. "Take it." Robert hesitated. "It's just a watch," he said quietly. Thomas shook his head. No, that was all. No explanation. No story. No sentimental speech about legacy or memory. Just that one word. No. Robert took it. The metal felt cold at first. He remembered that. Then warm as his fingers closed around it. His father watched him, eyes steady. "Don't lose time," he said. Another pause. "Not this one." Robert frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Thomas didn't answer. He leaned back into the pillow as if the effort of speaking had already cost him more than he intended to spend. That was the last real conversation they had. 2 days later, Thomas Williams was gone. Robert never opened the watch. He never had a reason to. It worked. It told time. That was enough. But there were things he noticed. Things he didn't question at the time. The weight, for one. It was heavier than any watch he had handled. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel dense. Solid in a way that didn't match its size. Then there was the mechanism. Robert had repaired watches before. Simple ones. He understood the basics. Springs, gears, movement. This one never needed winding. Not once. Years passed. Decades almost. And it never slowed. Never stopped. He noticed the backplate too. A faint engraving. Not a name. Not a date. A symbol. 3 intersecting lines. Almost like coordinates. Or a map reduced to its simplest form. He traced it once years ago with the tip of a screwdriver. Then he stopped. He didn't know why. Standing in the penthouse watching Ava hand the watch to Marcus Hale, those fragments aligned. Not fully, but enough. Marcus took the watch with both hands. Respectful. Professional. He turned it under the light. Vintage, he said almost to himself. Ava leaned in. Not valuable, though. Right, Marcus didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his grip, studied the face, the casing, the edges. Robert watched him. Not Marcus's expression. His hands. The way his thumb pressed lightly against the side. Testing weight. Balance. There it was. A slight pause. Barely noticeable. But Robert saw it. Marcus felt it too. "This isn't standard," Marcus said finally. Ava laughed. "It's old." Marcus didn't react to her tone. "May I?" he asked, glancing at Robert. Robert met his eyes. For a second, the room narrowed. The noise faded. The glass, the voices, the music, all of it receded into a distant blur. Robert gave a small nod. Marcus flipped the watch over, examined the back. His finger brushed across the engraving. Another pause. Longer this time. "You've had this long?" Marcus asked. Robert's voice was steady. "Since I was 20. Marcus looked up. "And before that, my father." Ava shifted beside them, impatient. Marcus, it's not a museum piece. Just tell me what it's worth. Marcus didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Robert. There are things you don't price immediately, he said. Ava's smile tightened. I'm not asking for a lecture. Marcus straightened slightly, closed the watch in his palm. I'd need to take a closer look. Ava tilted her head. How much Marcus considered? Offhand. A few hundred, maybe more depending on condition. Ava let out a soft, satisfied laugh. See? She turned to the group behind them. Told you, nothing special. The laughter returned, louder this time. Easier. Robert didn't move. A few hundred. That was the number the room would remember, not the pause, not the wait, not the look Marcus gave him before answering. Ava reached out. Sell it, she said, as if the decision had already been made. Marcus hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. If you're sure. I am. Robert watched the exchange. Watched as Marcus placed the watch gently into a leather case, closed it, snapped it shut. The sound was soft, but final. Ava exhaled, almost relieved. One less embarrassing thing to explain. Robert's hand flexed at his side. Empty. The absence of the watch was louder now, a quiet imbalance that followed every small movement. He turned his wrist slightly. Out of habit. Nothing there. Across the room, the city lights reflected in the glass. Thousands of points. Moving. Shifting. Time measured in something larger than seconds. Robert's gaze settled back on the case in Marcus's hand. Not emotional. Focused. Pieces were moving. He didn't understand all of them yet, but he recognized the pattern forming. Ava stepped away, already pulling her phone from her purse, attention shifting to something else. Something more important. The room moved with her. Robert stayed where he was, still, watching. Not the people. The exit. Marcus was already making his way toward it. Marcus Hale didn't rush. That was the first thing Robert noticed as he stepped away from the cluster of guests and moved toward the private hallway leading out of the penthouse. Marcus didn't weave through the crowd. He didn't look back. He walked at a steady, controlled pace, the leather case tucked under his arm like something that already belonged to him. Robert followed. Not immediately. He gave it 5 seconds. Enough time to avoid drawing attention. Enough time for Ava's voice to blend back into the room, rising above the soft music as she laughed at something Daniel Brooks said. Robert moved then. Quiet, unnoticed. The hallway outside the main space was dimmer, carpeted, sound dampened. The kind of place where conversations dropped and footsteps mattered. Marcus was halfway to the elevator. Mr. Hale. Robert's voice carried just enough. Marcus stopped, turned. For a brief moment his expression didn't change. Neutral, professional. Then recognition settled in. Mr. Williams. They stood facing each other 10 feet apart. No audience, no laughter, just the low hum of the building and the distant echo of the party behind closed doors. Robert closed the distance. I'd like to buy it back. Marcus didn't answer right away. He adjusted the grip on the leather case slightly. Not defensive, just aware. That's not how this works, he said. Robert nodded once. I understand. Silence. Marcus studied him. Not the clothes, not the posture, the eyes. You let her sell it, Marcus said. Robert didn't deny it. Yes. And now you want it back, yes. Marcus exhaled quietly, a measured breath. There are steps between those 2 points. Robert's gaze didn't shift. What did you feel? Marcus frowned slightly. When you held it, Robert continued. Just now. What did you notice? That question changed something, not dramatically, but enough. Marcus tilted his head a fraction. It's heavier than it should be, he said. Robert nodded. What else? Marcus hesitated. There's resistance in the casing, like it's not just a shell. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. Exactly. Marcus looked down at the case, then back up. You've known this the whole time, no? Then why Robert cut him off not with volume, but with precision? Because my father didn't give me things without reason. The words settled between them. Marcus's posture shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Your father, he said slowly. What did he do, engineer? What kind? Robert paused. He could have answered simply, mechanical, industrial. But the truth wasn't simple. Midwest Defense Systems. That name carried weight. Marcus didn't show it immediately, but Robert saw the flicker, the quick recalibration behind the eyes. Defense contracts, government work, classified layers beneath ordinary descriptions. You're saying this watch. I'm saying I don't know what it is, Robert said, but I know it's not what she thinks it is. Marcus's fingers tapped once against the case, a decision forming. Behind them, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Marcus didn't move. Come with me, he said. Robert didn't hesitate. The elevator ride was silent. 32 floors down, the numbers ticking off in steady intervals above the door. Robert stood with his hands at his sides. No fidgeting, no visible tension. But his mind was moving, fast. Patterns, connections, fragments from years ago resurfacing with new context. The weight, the symbol, the fact that his father had never explained. Not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't, or because it wasn't time. The doors opened into the lobby. Marble floors, polished surfaces, night staff moving with quiet efficiency. Marcus led the way outside, where a black sedan waited at the curb. Get in, he said. Robert did. They drove in silence for 10 minutes. Downtown lights gave way to quieter streets, oak-lined avenues, less traffic, fewer eyes. Marcus finally spoke as the car turned onto Oak Street. My office is upstairs, he said. Private. Robert nodded. The building was discreet. No large signage, just a small brass plaque near the entrance. Hale and Company timepieces. Inside, the space was dimly lit. Glass cases, soft spotlights, the faint scent of polished wood and leather. Marcus moved with familiarity, locked the door behind them, set the leather case on a central table. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he walked to a cabinet, retrieved a set of tools, precision instruments, small, exact. Robert watched everything. The preparation, the care. Marcus returned to the table. Before I do this, he said, you need to understand something. Robert didn't speak. If there's nothing inside, if this is just a vintage piece with an unusual build, you don't get a refund on curiosity. Robert's expression didn't change. I'm not here for a refund. Marcus studied him for a second longer. Then he nodded. He opened the case. The watch rested inside exactly as Robert remembered it. Scratches along the edge, slight discoloration near 6. Unremarkable. Unless you knew where to look. Marcus picked it up, turned it over. His finger traced the engraving. 3 intersecting lines, he said. Almost like coordinates Robert finished. Marcus glanced up. Maybe. He positioned the watch under a focused light. The brightness cut through the dim room, isolating the object in a sharp circle of white. Everything else faded. Marcus selected a thin blade, slid it carefully along the seam of the back plate. There was resistance, more than expected. He adjusted his grip, applied slightly more pressure. A faint click, barely audible. But there. Marcus froze for half a second, then continued. The backplate shifted. Not fully, just enough. He set the blade down, used his fingers now. Slower, more deliberate. Robert leaned forward slightly, not enough to interfere, just enough to see. The plate came loose, Marcus lifted it, and for the first time in over 2 decades, the inside of the watch was exposed. Marcus didn't speak. Neither did Robert. They both saw it. Not gears, not springs, something else. Something that didn't belong inside a watch. Marcus exhaled slowly. What the hell is that? Robert didn't answer. He was already stepping closer, eyes locked on the interior. The past. The silence, the weight, everything converging into this one moment. The moment his father never explained, now opening itself. Marcus didn't touch it again. Not immediately. The watch lay open under the focused beam of light, its exposed interior catching sharp reflections from the metal edges around it. But what sat inside didn't reflect like metal. It absorbed light. Robert leaned closer. The shape was precise, clean, not improvised, a rectangular component no larger than a fingernail embedded where mechanical gears should have been. Thin gold lines ran across its surface in geometric patterns, too exact to be decorative. A microchip. Marcus exhaled again, slower this time. "That's not possible," he said almost under his breath. Robert didn't respond. His eyes didn't move from the chip. His father's voice surfaced again, not as sound, but as presence. Short sentences, unfinished explanations. The way Thomas Williams always spoke, like he assumed people could keep up. "Don't lose time." Robert's jaw tightened. Marcus reached for a pair of tweezers. Hesitated. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. Robert's voice was calm. "It's already open. That was enough." Marcus carefully lifted the microchip from its housing. It didn't resist, which meant it was designed to be removed, not hidden forever. That detail mattered. Marcus placed it gently on a black mat. The contrast made the circuitry clearer. "There's more," he said. Robert's eyes shifted back to the watch casing. Inside the compartment beneath where the chip had rested there was a second layer, a thin panel. Marcus noticed it too. He adjusted the angle of the light. "There's a seam." Robert stepped closer. "Open it." Marcus gave him a quick look, then nodded. The second panel required less force. It slid aside with a controlled movement, revealing something even smaller beneath it. A metallic sliver. No markings, no obvious function. Marcus picked it up. "This isn't storage," he said. "It's a key." Robert's mind moved faster now. Chip, key, separated. Not meant to be found together accidentally. His father hadn't hidden something. He had built a system. "What kind of key?" Robert asked. Marcus turned it under the light. "Could be physical. Could be digital. Could be both." He looked back at Robert. "Where did your father work exactly?" "Midwest Defense Systems." Marcus nodded slowly. "That tracks?" Robert didn't ask what he meant. He already understood enough. Defense contractors didn't deal in simple data. They dealt in controlled information, restricted systems, redundancy. Anything important would never exist in one place. Marcus set the key beside the chip. "You've got 2 parts of something bigger," he said, "but without knowing what system this belongs to." Robert's gaze shifted again. Not to the table, to the past. There had been other things he hadn't connected before. After his father died, there was no will in the traditional sense, no property beyond the small house in Evanston, no accounts that made sense for a man who had worked in defense engineering for over 30 years. But there had been paperwork. Not official, not organized. A box of documents Robert never fully sorted through, because at the time there was nothing to look for. Now there was. "I need to go," Robert said. Marcus blinked. "That's it for now." Marcus glanced at the chip, the key, then back at Robert. "You're not just going to walk out with this." Robert's eyes met his. "I'm not leaving it here." A pause. Measured. Marcus wasn't a fool. He understood value. Not just monetary. This wasn't a watch anymore. This was leverage, or risk, or both. "Then we need an understanding," Marcus said. Robert didn't move. I didn't sign up to be involved in whatever this is, Marcus continued. But I also can't pretend I didn't see it. Robert nodded once. That's fair. So Robert looked down at the table, then back up. You keep quiet, he said, and you get paid. Marcus raised an eyebrow. How much Robert didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't have a number, because he was calculating something else. Trust. Leverage. Marcus had already shown restraint. He hadn't taken the watch apart earlier, hadn't pushed Ava, hadn't exposed what he noticed in the room. That meant something. But it didn't mean everything. Enough, Robert said finally. Marcus studied him, then gave a small nod. All right? He stepped back slightly, hands off the table. Take it. Robert reached forward. His fingers closed around the watch first. The weight returned instantly. Familiar. Grounding. Then he picked up the microchip. Light. Too light for what it represented. And finally the key. Cold. Precise. He placed both into his pocket. Marcus watched the movement carefully. You realize, he said, if this ties back to anything federal, anything classified, you're stepping into something that doesn't forgive mistakes. Robert didn't react. I don't plan on making any. Marcus almost smiled. Everyone says that. Robert turned toward the door. Do you have a reader? He asked without looking back. For the chip, yes? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. In the back. Show me. The room behind the showroom was smaller, functional, no display cases, just equipment. A workstation sat against the wall, multiple monitors, hardware stacked neatly, tools organized with precision. Marcus powered up the system. You're lucky, he said. I deal with authentication. Some collectors want digital verification. I've got readers for most formats. Robert stood beside him, watched every movement. Marcus inserted the chip into a small interface slot. The system responded immediately. A prompt appeared on the screen. Encrypted file detected. Access key required. Marcus leaned back slightly. Well, he said that answers one question. Robert reached into his pocket, pulled out the metallic key, held it for a second, not hesitating, just recognizing the moment. Then he handed it over. Marcus examined it briefly. No markings, he said. No guidance. Robert's voice was steady. There is. Marcus glanced at him. Robert nodded toward the screen. Try it. Marcus inserted the key into a secondary slot. The system processed. A pause. Longer than before. Then access granted. The screen shifted. Data began to load. Lines of text. Files. Directories. Structured, organized, not random. Marcus leaned forward. Jesus. Robert didn't speak. His eyes scanned the screen. Names, accounts, transactions, dates, and then one name that didn't belong. Not here. Not connected to this. But it was. Clear. Undeniable. Caldwell and Pierce, LLP. Robert's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. Not shock? Confirmation? The pattern was no longer forming. It was complete. Behind him, Marcus spoke again. You're going to need more than curiosity for this. Robert nodded. I know. He was already thinking ahead. Steps, order, control, because this wasn't about the watch anymore. It never had been. Robert didn't leave immediately. He stood in front of the screen for another 30 seconds, long enough to confirm one thing: the data wasn't random. It was structured. Directories labeled with dates, transaction logs tied to specific offshore accounts, shell corporations nested inside each other like layers designed to confuse anyone who didn't know where to look. But Robert knew where to look. Not because he had seen this exact system before, because he understood how engineers thought. Everything had a logic, even secrets. He stepped back. Disconnected, he said. Marcus didn't argue. He ejected the chip, powered down the reader, and removed the key. The screen went black. Just like that, the information was gone again. Contained. Controlled. Robert slid both pieces back into his pocket. The watch followed. The weight settled against his palm before he let it drop back to his wrist. It felt complete again. Not emotionally, functionally. Marcus leaned against the edge of the table. You planning to take that straight to the police? Robert shook his head. No. Marcus frowned. That's not something you sit on. Robert's eyes moved toward the door, then back. It's not something you rush either. That answer told Marcus enough. This wasn't panic. This was calculation. You're going after them, Marcus said. Robert didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. I'm going home, he said. Marcus straightened slightly. And your wife? A brief pause. Robert adjusted his cuff covering the watch. She doesn't know anything yet. Marcus let out a slow breath. That won't last. No, Robert said. It won't. He turned and walked toward the door. Marcus didn't follow. But just before Robert reached the exit, Marcus spoke again. Be careful who you trust. Robert stopped, not turning. I don't trust anyone. Then he left. The drive back to North Wabash Avenue was quiet. Chicago at night had a different rhythm. Fewer cars, longer lights, reflections stretching across wet pavement where the city had been washed earlier in the evening. Robert drove without music, without distraction. His mind wasn't racing. It was aligning. Pieces that had existed separately for years were beginning to lock into place. His father's silence, the missing assets, the watch, and now Caldwell and Pierce. Not a coincidence, not possible. He parked in the underground garage beneath the building, engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Still. For a moment he didn't move, not because he was unsure, because he was choosing his next step carefully. Then he opened the door and stepped out. The apartment was lit. That told him Ava was home. He entered quietly, closed the door behind him with the same controlled motion he used for everything else. Voices carried from the living room. Not one voice. Two. Robert paused. Listened. Ava. And someone else. Male, familiar. Daniel Brooks. Robert didn't change expression. He walked forward. The living room opened up under soft, ambient lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows. City skyline stretching beyond. Ava stood near the bar, glass in hand. Daniel leaned casually against the counter jacket, off sleeves rolled. They stopped talking when Robert entered. Ava turned first. Oh, she said. You're back. Her tone wasn't surprised. Just mildly inconvenienced. Daniel gave a small nod. Robert. Robert returned it. No tension in his posture, no visible reaction. He stepped into the room, set his keys on the table. I didn't expect company, he said. Ava shrugged. Daniel needed to go over a case. Robert's eyes moved briefly to the open laptop on the counter. No documents visible. No files. Just a blank screen. He didn't comment. Daniel pushed off the counter. I was just leaving, he said. Ava didn't stop him. Text me when you get home, she added. Daniel smiled. Always do. He grabbed his jacket, walked past Robert, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Robert didn't move, didn't look at him. The door closed behind Daniel a few seconds later. Silence settled. Ava took a sip of her drink. You're late, she said. Robert walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, had something to take care of. Ava watched him. What kind of something? He took out a bottle of water, closed the door. Work. She let out a quiet laugh. Since when does maintenance run past midnight? Robert unscrewed the cap. Drank, didn't answer. Ava set her glass down. You're acting strange. Robert leaned against the counter. Am I? Yes. A pause. Then she tilted her head slightly. Is this about the watch? There it was, direct, casual, as if the entire situation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Robert looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "Where is it?" Ava blinked once. "Sold. To who?" She shrugged. "Marcus will handle it." Robert nodded slowly. "Of course he will." Ava crossed her arms. "It wasn't worth anything, Robert. Let it go." He studied her. Not emotionally. Objectively. The confidence, the dismissal, the certainty that she had already defined the value of something she never understood. "You were embarrassed by it," he said. She didn't deny it. Yes, a beat. It didn't fit. Robert's gaze dropped briefly to his wrist. The watch sat there again. Silent. Unremarkable. Exactly as it had always been. He adjusted it slightly. Ava noticed. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that?" Robert looked back up. "Back." The word landed heavier than expected. Ava's expression shifted. "How does it matter?" "Yes," she said sharply. "It does." Robert didn't answer. He turned, walked past her toward the hallway. Ava followed. "Robert." He stopped at the edge of the bedroom door, turned just enough to face her. What her voice was tighter now, less controlled. "That wasn't yours to just—" He cut her off. "It was never yours to sell." Silence. Ava held his gaze. For the first time that night, something in her expression faltered. Not guilt, not regret. Uncertainty. It didn't last long. "You're overreacting," she said. Robert nodded once. Maybe. Then he stepped into the bedroom and closed the door. Not slammed, just closed. On the other side, Ava stood still for a moment, then reached for her phone. Robert didn't hear what she said. He was already at the dresser, pulling open the bottom drawer. The box was still there. Old, worn, unorganized. His father's things. He placed the watch carefully on the surface, then took out the microchip, the key, set them beside it. 3 pieces, now understood as one. He sat down, opened the box. Papers shifted under his hands. Receipts, notes, fragments of a life that had never been explained. Until now. Robert exhaled slowly, not tired, not overwhelmed, focused. Because this wasn't just about what his father left behind. It was about why, and who had been part of it. He picked up the first document, a page filled with numbers, coordinates, dates, and in the corner, a familiar abbreviation, MDS. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. The past wasn't buried. It had been waiting. Robert didn't sleep. The city moved through the night outside the glass walls, but inside the apartment, time slowed into something more deliberate, measured not in hours but in decisions. The documents from the box covered half the bedroom floor now. Not scattered, organized. Robert had sorted them into groups, dates, coordinates, transaction references, and fragments of correspondence that didn't look like correspondence at first glance. His father never labeled anything clearly, but he never wrote without purpose. Robert sat cross-legged on the floor, one sheet in his hand, another already memorized beside him. Patterns were emerging. Not random, layered. The coordinates repeated across different pages. Not identical, but offset, as if each one pointed to a slightly different position around the same location. Chicago, downtown, near the river. Robert circled one set with a pen, then another. 3 points, a triangle. He leaned back slightly. The engraving on the watch surfaced in his mind again. 3 intersecting lines. Not decoration, a map. He reached for the watch, turned it over. The symbol aligned with the points on the paper, not exactly, but close enough to confirm intent. His father hadn't hidden data. He had hidden access. Robert's eyes shifted to the microchip on the table, then to the key, then back to the documents. This wasn't just evidence. It was a system designed to survive, which meant someone had tried to erase it. The thought didn't create panic. It clarified the stakes. Behind him, the bedroom door opened. Robert didn't turn. Ava stepped in, barefoot, phone still in her hand, the faint glow of the screen lighting her face for a second before she locked it. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her tone wasn't sharp. Not yet. Curiosity. Controlled. Robert didn't answer immediately. He set the paper down carefully, then looked over his shoulder. "Cleaning up." Ava frowned slightly. "That doesn't look like cleaning." She stepped further into the room. Her eyes moved across the floor. The documents. The arrangement. Then to the table. The watch. The microchip. The key. She stopped. "What is that?" she asked. Robert followed her gaze. "Something my father left me." Ava took another step, closer now. Her posture changed. Not aggressive. Alert. That wasn't in the watch before, she said. It wasn't a question. Robert turned back to the papers. No. Silence. Ava studied him. "You took it apart, no?" Then who did Robert didn't respond? Ava's jaw tightened slightly. "Robert." He picked up another sheet. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said. "It does." Robert looked at her again, this time longer. "Why?" That question landed differently. Ava didn't answer right away, because there wasn't a simple answer. Not one she could say without revealing more than she intended. Her eyes shifted briefly to the documents again, then back to him. "You're hiding something," she said. Robert nodded once. "Yes." No denial, no deflection. Just confirmation. Ava wasn't expecting that. It threw her off balance. What she asked. Robert held her gaze. "Not everything is yours to know." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Ava's expression hardened. "That's not how this works." Robert tilted his head slightly. "Isn't it?" She stepped closer. "This is my apartment, my life. If something is happening here, I need to know." Robert didn't raise his voice. "You needed to know before you sold it." Silence. That line stayed in the air longer than anything else. Ava crossed her arms. Defensive now. "You're still on that." Robert did not respond. He didn't need to. Ava exhaled sharply. It was a watch, Robert. A cheap one. Robert's eyes dropped to the microchip, then back to her. No. The simplicity of that answer unsettled her more than any argument could have. She took a step back, studied him. This wasn't the same man who stood quietly at the edge of her parties. Something had shifted, not dramatically, but enough. "What is this really about?" she asked. Robert didn't answer. Instead, he stood, slowly, not confrontational, just present. The space between them felt different now, measured, equal. Ava noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You think you're in control," she said. Robert didn't react. "I think I'm informed," he replied. That word hit harder, because it implied something else, that she wasn't. Ava laughed once, short, sharp, about what Robert walked past her. Back toward the table, picked up the microchip, held it between his fingers for a second, then set it down again. "About where this leads." Ava turned. "You don't even know what that is." Robert looked at her. "I know enough." Silence again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was building. Ava reached for her phone, unlocked it, typed something quickly. Robert watched the movement, not the screen, her hands, the speed, the urgency she was trying to hide. "You calling Daniel?" he asked. She didn't look up. "No." Robert nodded once, Of course. Ava's fingers paused for half a second, then continued. She hit send, locked the phone, set it down. You're being paranoid, she said. Robert didn't respond. He was already moving again, back to the papers, picking up another sheet, another coordinate, another connection. Ava watched him for a moment longer, then turned, walked out of the room. The door didn't slam, it closed, but not softly. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Robert didn't stop. The pattern was clearer now. The coordinates weren't just locations, they were access points. Physical. Each one tied to a date, each date tied to a transaction, and each transaction connected to Caldwell and Pierce. Robert leaned back slightly. The implication settled in. His father hadn't just documented corruption, he had mapped it, systematically, carefully, over time. Which meant this wasn't recent. It had been running for years, maybe longer. Robert's gaze shifted to the door. Ava had been gone too long, not unusual, but not random either. He stood, walked to the window, looked down at the street below. 2 black cars had pulled up along the curb, parked, engines still running. He watched. One of the doors opened. A man stepped out. Suit, controlled movement, not casual, not a neighbor. Robert's expression didn't change, but his mind adjusted instantly. The timing wasn't coincidence. Ava hadn't just sent a message, she had triggered something. Behind him, the bedroom door opened again. Robert didn't turn. "Who did you call?" he asked. Ava didn't answer immediately. He could hear it in her breathing. Slightly faster now. Controlled, but not calm. "It's just business," she said. Robert nodded slowly, eyes still on the street. "I'm sure it is." The second car door opened. Another man stepped out, both of them looking up, toward the building. Robert finally turned, looked at Ava. This time there was no question left, only confirmation. "They're not here for business," he said. Ava held his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't deny it. Robert didn't move right away. He stood still in the center of the bedroom watching Ava, not her face, but the small details she couldn't fully control. Her shoulders, too rigid, her breathing, just slightly uneven, and her eyes, no longer dismissive, focused, calculating. That told him everything he needed to know. The men downstairs weren't a bluff. They were a response, fast, coordinated, expected, which meant the system his father had uncovered was still active and protected. "Who are they?" Robert asked. His tone didn't change. No accusation. Just a question placed carefully. Ava held his gaze. For a second it looked like she might answer. Then she shook her head. "You don't want to be involved in this." Robert nodded once. "I already am." Silence. That answer closed something between them. Ava exhaled slowly. "This isn't what you think." Robert tilted his head slightly, then explain it. She didn't, because she couldn't explain without admitting, and admitting meant exposure. So instead she pivoted. "You should give me whatever you found," she said. There it was. Direct now. No more pretending. Robert didn't react immediately. He took one step toward the table, placed his hand lightly on the documents. "What happens if I don't?" he asked. Ava didn't hesitate this time. "They come up." The words were simple, flat, but they carried a different kind of weight. Not emotional, procedural. Robert nodded slowly. "Of course they do." He glanced toward the window again. The cars were still there, engines running, waiting. He turned back to Ava. "You didn't even wait," he said. She frowned. "For what?" "For me to decide." Ava's expression tightened. "This isn't a negotiation." Robert's eyes held hers. "Everything is." A beat, then a knock, not loud, but firm. From the front door. Both of them heard it. Ava didn't move. Neither did Robert. The knock came again. 2 beats this time. Measured, professional, not aggressive, not hesitant. Robert walked past Ava, out of the bedroom, down the hallway, each step controlled. Even. No rush. Behind him, Ava followed, but she didn't try to pass him. She stayed half a step back. The dynamic had shifted, even if she hadn't accepted it yet. Robert reached the door, stopped, listened. No voices, no movement outside. Just presence. He turned the lock, opened the door. 2 men stood in the hallway, both in suits, dark, clean, no visible weapons, but they didn't need to show them. The one on the left spoke first. "Mr. Williams." "Not a question, recognition." Robert nodded once. "That's me." The man's gaze flicked briefly past him toward Ava, then back. "We'd like to talk." Robert leaned slightly against the doorframe. "About what?" A pause. The man chose his words carefully. "A matter that concerns your family." Robert's eyes didn't shift. "Be specific." The second man stepped forward half an inch. "Not aggressive, just deliberate. Something you came into possession of tonight?" There it was. Clear enough. Robert considered that, then stepped aside. "Come in." Ava's head snapped slightly toward him. That wasn't what she expected, but she didn't interrupt. The 2 men entered. Their movements were controlled. They didn't look around the apartment like strangers. They looked like people confirming what they already knew. Robert closed the door behind them. "Living room," he said. They moved together, sat, didn't relax. Robert stayed standing. Ava remained near the hallway, watching. The first man spoke again. "My name is Eric Lawson. This is Michael Trent. No badges, no credentials offered, just names." Robert nodded. "Robert Williams." A faint, almost polite acknowledgement passed between them. Then Lawson continued. "We believe you're in possession of an item that does not belong to you." Robert's expression remained neutral. "That depends on how you define ownership." Michael Trent leaned forward slightly. "It was never meant to be accessed." Robert folded his arms loosely. And yet it was. A small pause. Lawson adjusted his tone. "We can resolve this quietly." Robert looked at him. "How you return the item," Lawson said. "We ensure no further complications." Robert's gaze moved briefly to Ava. She didn't meet it. That was answer enough. He looked back at Lawson. "And if I don't," Trent spoke this time, "then this becomes something else." Robert nodded slowly. "More complicated?" "Yes." Silence settled. Robert walked to the table, picked up the watch, turned it once in his hand. Set it back down. Then the microchip. Then the key. He didn't hand them over. He just touched them. Ava watched every movement, tense now, not in control anymore. Lawson's eyes followed Robert's hands. "You don't understand what that is," he said. Robert looked up. "I understand enough." Trent's jaw tightened. "No, you don't." Robert didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the window, looked down at the street again. 2 cars, still running, still waiting. He turned back. "What happens after I give it to you?" he asked. Lawson answered without hesitation. "You go back to your life." Robert almost smiled. "Which one?" That question didn't have a clean answer, and Lawson knew it, so he didn't try. Instead, he shifted approach. "This doesn't have to escalate." Robert nodded. "But it will." A beat. Trent leaned back slightly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Robert's voice stayed calm. "No, I'm making it visible." That word landed differently. Visible. Lawson's expression changed just slightly, because that was the real risk. Not possession, exposure. Robert saw it, confirmed it. "You're not here to recover an object," he said. "You're here to contain it." Neither man denied it. That was enough. Robert walked back to the table, picked up the microchip, held it up between his fingers. Small, unremarkable. until you knew what it carried. Ava stepped forward. Robert, stop. Her voice was tighter now, urgent, not controlled. He didn't look at her. He looked at Lawson. If this disappears, Robert said so does everything on it. Lawson's eyes narrowed slightly. That would be unfortunate. Robert nodded. For you. Silence. Heavy now. The balance had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Trent leaned forward again. What do you want? There it was. The question they didn't want to ask. Robert set the chip back down. Slowly, deliberately. I want time, he said. Lawson frowned. For what? Robert met his eyes. To understand what my father died for. That answer wasn't expected. And it changed the room. Because this wasn't just leverage anymore. It was personal. And personal things didn't follow predictable rules. Ava looked at him. Really looked this time. As if seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not the quiet man. Not the background figure. Something else. Something she hadn't accounted for. Lawson exhaled slowly. That's not something we can give you. Robert nodded. I know. A pause. Then he added, but you don't have a choice. Trent's expression hardened. You're assuming a lot. Robert shook his head slightly. No. He glanced at the table, at the documents, at the system his father had built, then back at them. I'm just following the pattern. And for the first time since they arrived, neither man had an immediate answer. The room didn't move, but the balance inside it did. Robert could feel it not as tension, but as alignment. The moment when uncertainty collapsed into direction. Eric Lawson leaned back slightly, studying him with more attention now. Not dismissive, not patient, evaluating. Michael Trent's posture was tighter, less composed. His hands rested on his knees, but the fingers flexed, once controlled, but not invisible. Ava stood near the hallway, silent. Watching, not speaking anymore. Robert noticed that. She had stopped trying to steer the conversation. That meant she had lost control of it, and she knew it. Robert picked up one of the documents from the table, held it loosely between his fingers. A page filled with numbers, coordinates, transaction codes. He didn't show it yet. He just let it exist in his hand. You said this wasn't meant to be accessed, Robert said, looking at Lawson. Lawson nodded once. That's correct? Robert tilted his head slightly. Then someone built it to be accessed. A pause. Not long, but enough. Lawson's eyes flicked briefly to the document in Robert's hand, then back. Your father built systems, he said. Not everything he built was meant for public understanding. Robert nodded slowly. I agree. He took a step forward, placed the document on the coffee table, flat, visible. Trent's eyes dropped to it, for half a second longer than necessary. That was all Robert needed. You recognize it, Robert said. It wasn't a question. Trent didn't answer. Lawson did. We've seen similar formats. Robert almost smiled. Not similar. He tapped the page once. Identical. Silence. Ava shifted slightly behind them. Robert continued. These aren't random entries. They're linked transactions, layered across multiple shell entities. He looked at Lawson, Caldwell and Pierce. The name landed hard. Trent's jaw tightened. Lawson didn't react outwardly, but something behind his eyes changed. That was confirmation. Robert didn't need more. You're not here because of the watch, he said. You're here because of what's inside it. Lawson's voice stayed even. That's what we've been saying. Robert shook his head slightly. No. He gestured to the documents. You're here because this connects. A beat. Then to something you don't want exposed. Silence again. But now it was different, heavier, because the conversation had moved past denial into implication. Trent leaned forward. You're making assumptions. Robert met his eyes. I'm reading patterns. That answer landed cleaner, sharper, because it wasn't emotional. It was methodical. Lawson exhaled slowly. What exactly do you think you have? He asked. Robert didn't answer immediately. He walked back to the table, picked up the microchip again, turned it between his fingers. The beginning, he said. Then he looked up. And the end. That confused them. He saw it. So he explained. My father didn't just store data, Robert said. He structured it. He pointed to the chip, access point, then to the key, authorization, then to the documents, context. He paused. Let that settle. You remove any one of these and it's useless, he said. He looked directly at Lawson. But together, a small beat. They tell a complete story. Trent's expression hardened. What story Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up another sheet. This one different. Not numbers, names, initials, dates. He placed it beside the first. Transfers routed through legal intermediaries, he said. Offshore accounts tied to defense contracts. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It stayed steady, controlled. Funds moving in patterns that don't match declared activity. Ava's breathing shifted again, slightly louder now. She hadn't seen this part. Robert knew it. He didn't look at her. He kept his focus on the two men in front of him. This isn't small, he said. It's not one case. He tapped the paper again. It's a system. Lawson's gaze stayed locked on him. And what do you plan to do with that information? Robert didn't hesitate. Finish what my father started. That answer landed differently, because it wasn't reactive, it was intentional. Trent leaned back. Your father didn't finish it for a reason. Robert nodded. Yes. A pause. Because he died. Silence. No one challenged that. Because no one could. Robert let that hang for a moment, then continued. But he didn't leave it unfinished, he said. He gestured to everything on the table. He left it. Paused. Lawson studied him. And you think you can resume it? Robert met his gaze. I think I already have. That was the shift. The moment the conversation stopped being about retrieval and became about control. Trent exhaled sharply. You're not equipped for this. Robert didn't react. You don't know what you're dealing with. Robert nodded. I know enough. Ava stepped forward. Robert. He didn't turn, not now. Her voice stopped, just like that, because the tone had changed. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. Lawson leaned forward slightly. Let's be clear, he said. This information, if it's what you believe it is, puts you in a position that doesn't end well. Robert looked at him. Depends who's defining the end. Lawson didn't answer. Trent did. People disappear over less. The room went quiet. Not dramatically, just still. Robert considered that, then nodded once. I'm aware. That answer surprised them, because it wasn't defiant, it was accepting, calculated. Lawson adjusted his posture. You're not the first person to think they can expose something like this, he said. Robert didn't interrupt, and none of them ended the way they expected. Robert let that settle. Then he asked, did any of them build the system? A pause. Short, but enough. Because the answer was no. Robert saw it, confirmed it. My father did, he said, and he built it to survive. He picked up the watch again, held it for a second, then placed it back down. You didn't find this, he continued. You didn't stop it. You didn't even know it existed. A beat. Until now. That was the leverage, not the data, the timing, the fact that the system had stayed hidden until Robert opened it. Lawson exhaled slowly. What do you want? He asked again. Robert didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, looked down at the cars. Still there. Still waiting. Then he turned back. I want space, he said. Lawson frowned. For what? Robert met his eyes. To decide how this ends. Trent shook his head slightly. That's not how this works. Robert nodded. It is now. Silence heavy, because neither man could immediately contradict that, not without escalating. And escalation carried risk, not just for Robert, for them. Lawson stood, slowly, measured. This doesn't stay contained forever, he said. Robert didn't argue. I know. Lawson adjusted his jacket. We'll be in touch. Robert nodded once. I'm counting on it. Trent stood as well. Both men moved toward the door. Ava stepped aside. Didn't speak. Didn't stop them. The door opened. Closed. And just like that, they were gone. The apartment fell silent. No music, no movement. Just the faint hum of the city outside. Ava turned toward Robert. Her expression had changed again. Not confident, not dismissive. Something else. Something closer to realization. You don't understand what you've done, she said. Robert looked at her. Calm. I do. A beat. Better than you. She held his gaze. For a long moment. Then asked, What happens now? Robert didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table, at the watch, at the chip, at the documents his father had left behind, then back at her. Now he said quietly, I start pulling the thread. And for the first time, Ava didn't have anything to say. Robert didn't move after he spoke. The sentence settled into the room like something final, not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. I start pulling the thread. Ava stood across from him, arms no longer crossed. Her posture had softened, but not in surrender. In uncertainty. What thread, she asked. Robert looked at her, not as a husband, not as someone trying to explain, as someone deciding what she was now. Every transaction, he said, every name, every location tied to those coordinates. He stepped past her, back toward the bedroom. Ava followed. You think you can just walk into this, she said. Robert didn't answer immediately. He entered the room, picked up one of the sheets from the floor, and held it up. Not walk, he said. He glanced at her. Trace. Ava shook her head slightly. You don't understand how these things work. Robert placed the paper back down. No, he said calmly. You don't understand how systems work. That landed harder than expected, because Ava wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by him. She stepped closer. You're not a lawyer, Robert. He nodded. I know. You don't have protection, I know. You don't have leverage. Robert looked at her again, this time longer. Then he gestured to the table. I do. Ava followed his gaze. The chip, the key, the documents. For the first time, she didn't dismiss them, but she still didn't fully understand. That's not leverage, she said, that's evidence. Robert tilted his head slightly. Exactly. A pause. Then, that's what makes it dangerous. Silence. Because now she heard it, not as an argument, as a fact. Robert moved again. He began gathering the documents, not hurried, not chaotic, deliberate, grouping them into stacks, organizing. Ava watched. What are you doing? She asked. Preparing. For what? Robert didn't answer immediately. He walked to the dresser, pulled out a leather folder, old, worn, not something Ava had ever paid attention to. He placed the documents inside, one by one, aligned, structured. For the next step, he said. Ava crossed her arms again. Not defensive this time. Thinking. You're going to the police, she said. Robert shook his head. Not yet. Her brow furrowed. Then who? Robert paused, considered the answer, then said, Someone who understands what this is before it becomes public. Ava's expression shifted again. Recognition. Not of the person, of the strategy. You're going to leverage it, she said quietly. Robert didn't deny it. I'm going to control it. A beat. That's the same thing. Robert zipped the folder closed. No, he said. It's not. He picked up the watch, fastened it around his wrist again. The motion was small, routine, but it carried weight. Because now it wasn't just a watch. It was a key to everything. Ava watched him. You're not walking out of here with that, she said. Robert looked at her. Calm. I already did. Her jaw tightened. That's not what I mean. Robert stepped closer. Not threatening, just present. Then say what you mean. Ava held his gaze. You're putting both of us at risk. Robert didn't respond immediately. He studied her, measured the words, then asked, Are you at risk? Ava hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Robert saw it, understood it. You are, he said, not accusing, not surprised, just confirming. Ava's eyes narrowed. You don't know that. Robert nodded slightly. I do. A beat. Because you called them. Silence. She didn't deny it. Because she couldn't. Not anymore. Robert stepped back, gave her space, but not distance. Why, he asked. Ava exhaled slowly. This time it wasn't controlled. It was real. You don't understand the position I'm in, she said. Robert waited, didn't interrupt, because this mattered. I didn't know what was inside the watch, she continued, but I knew it wasn't just nothing. Robert's expression didn't change. So you sold it. Ava shook her head. I moved it. The distinction was intentional. Robert noticed. To who he asked. She hesitated. Then Marcus was just the middle, she said. That confirmed something. Robert's mind adjusted. So who's the end? Ava didn't answer. Not directly. But her silence was enough. Because now Robert understood Marcus wasn't random. The auction wasn't random. The watch had been targeted, which meant someone had been looking for it. Long before Robert opened it. Robert turned away, walked to the window again. The cars were still there, but one of them had shifted position slightly. Closer. Waiting. He looked back at Ava. They knew, he said. She didn't respond. They knew what it was. Ava finally spoke. Not exactly. Robert tilted his head. But enough. She nodded once, reluctantly. Yes. Silence. The implications settled. Not just betrayal, timing, precision. This had been in motion long before tonight. Robert looked at the folder in his hand, then back at her. How long, he asked. Ava didn't answer, because that answer would define everything. Robert waited. 10 seconds. Maybe more. Then she said, a few months. That was enough. Robert nodded slowly, since my father's things were moved. Ava didn't deny it. That confirmed the rest. Someone had tracked the estate, followed the transfer, identified the watch, and used Ava to get to it. Robert exhaled quietly. Not anger, clarity. You didn't sell it to humiliate me, he said. Ava frowned slightly. That was part of it. Robert shook his head. No. He stepped closer again. You sold it because someone wanted it. Silence. She didn't argue. Because she couldn't. Robert looked at her one last time. Not with emotion, with conclusion. You were part of the system, he said. Ava's voice came out lower now. I didn't know what it was. Robert nodded. I believe you. A beat. But you knew enough. That was the difference. And it mattered. Ava looked away. For the first time. Not because she was ashamed, because she couldn't hold the line anymore. Robert turned toward the door, picked up his keys, the folder, everything he needed. Ava stepped forward. Where are you going? Robert didn't stop. Downtown. For what? He opened the door, paused, then said to find the first point on the map. He stepped out. The hallway was quiet. The elevator light blinked at the far end. Behind him, Ava didn't follow, didn't stop him. Because now she understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't about control anymore. It was about exposure. And Robert Williams was no longer someone she could predict. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, pressed the button. And as the doors closed, his reflection in the metal surface looked different. Not stronger, not louder, just certain. The system had been hidden for years. Now it had been opened, and he was the only one holding the thread. The elevator descended in silence. Robert stood alone, the leather folder held loosely in his left hand, his right wrist resting near the panel. The watch caught a faint reflection from the overhead light. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Still invisible, still underestimated, just like before. But now it carried weight, not sentimental, strategic. The doors opened into the underground garage. Cool air, concrete. The low hum of engines idling somewhere in the distance. Robert stepped out. Didn't rush, didn't look around immediately. He walked to his car, unlocked it, then paused with his hand on the door. Listening. There it was. Footsteps. Not hidden, not loud, just enough. He closed the door again without getting in. Turned. Two figures approached from the far end of the garage, different from the men upstairs. These weren't suits. They wore darker clothes, less formal, more functional, not representatives, operators. Robert didn't move. They stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to assess. One of them nodded once. "Mr. Williams?" The same tone. Recognition without introduction. Robert nodded back. "That's me." The second man stepped slightly forward. "We need to ask you to come with us." Not aggressive, but not optional. Robert looked at them, then at the cars near the exit, then back. "On whose behalf?" he asked. A brief pause. The first man answered. "You already know?" Robert considered that, then shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I don't." Silence. The second man's posture tightened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Robert almost smiled. "I've heard that tonight." "A beat. Then I'm not going anywhere." The words were calm, not defiant, final. The two men exchanged a quick glance. Small, but meaningful. They hadn't expected resistance, not from him. The first man adjusted his stance. "Mr. Williams, this is just a conversation." Robert nodded. "Then we can have it here." The man exhaled slowly. "This isn't the place." Robert's gaze didn't shift. "It is for me." A pause. "Then you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you." Robert tilted his head slightly. Everyone keeps saying that. He lifted the folder just enough for them to see it. But no one explains why. The second man stepped forward another inch. "Because it's not yours." Robert held his ground. "It was my father's." "That doesn't make it yours." Robert nodded slowly. "It does." Silence. The first man's eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't understand the position you're in." Robert's voice stayed level. "I understand it better than you think." He tapped the folder lightly. "This doesn't just contain data. A beat. It contains liability." That word landed. Clear, precise. Both men reacted subtly. But enough. Robert saw it, confirmed it. "You're not here to take this," he continued. "You're here to make sure I don't use it." The second man didn't deny it. "You're not supposed to have it." Robert nodded. "And yet I do." A pause. Then, "So now what?" Silence again. The kind that stretches just long enough to reveal who holds control. Robert didn't fill it. He waited. The first man finally spoke. "You come with us," he said. "We talk. We figure this out." Robert shook his head. "No." The word didn't echo. It settled, heavy. The second man's patience shifted. You don't have a choice. Robert looked at him. Yes, I do. A beat. Because I already moved it. That changed everything. Both men froze just for a fraction of a second. Then, what do you mean, the first man asked. Robert didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped back. Created space. If something happens to me, he said, this goes public. Silence, not empty, charged. Because now the situation had changed. Completely. You're bluffing, the second man said. Robert shook his head. No. He met his eyes. I'm prepared. That word mattered. Prepared. Not reactive, not scared. Planned. The first man studied him more carefully now, reassessing. Because this wasn't the quiet maintenance worker they expected. This was someone who had already taken steps, and they didn't know how many. Who has it, he asked. Robert didn't answer. Instead, he got into his car, closed the door. The engine started. The two men didn't move. Not yet. Because they didn't know what the next move was, and uncertainty was risk. Robert rolled down the window slightly, looked at them one last time. This isn't about me, he said. A beat, it never was. Then he drove. Downtown Chicago at that hour wasn't empty, but it wasn't crowded either. Traffic lights shifted from red to green with no cars waiting. The river reflected the city lights in long, broken lines. Robert drove with purpose, not fast, not slow, exact. The coordinates were already in his mind. He didn't need a GPS, didn't need directions. His father had drawn it out. Step by step. 3 points. 3 locations. The first one closest, near the Chicago Riverwalk. An old service entrance built into the lower level of a commercial building, not visible from the street unless you knew where to look. Robert parked 2 blocks away, walked the rest. The air was cooler near the water. Damp. Quiet. The city noise softened here. He found the location without hesitation. A steel door, faded, unmarked. No signage, no indication of use, just there. He stopped in front of it, looked at the handle, then at the surrounding wall. Nothing obvious. No keypad, no scanner, no camera. Which meant it wasn't meant for random access. Robert reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, small, unremarkable. Until now. He held it up, compared it to the lock. Not a perfect match, at first glance. But then he saw it. The shape. The angles. It wasn't a traditional key, it was designed, specifically. He inserted it. Turned. A soft click. Almost silent. The door unlocked. Robert paused. Listened. Nothing. He pushed it open. Inside, darkness. Cold air, and a narrow staircase leading down. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The city disappeared, replaced by silence. He moved slowly down the stairs, each step measured, controlled. At the bottom, a small room, concrete walls, no windows, a single light fixture overhead, and in the center, a metal cabinet. Locked. Of course. Robert walked toward it, set the folder on top, opened it, pulled out one of the documents. The coordinates. The date. The code. Then he looked at the cabinet. There was a slot. Not for a key. For something else. Robert reached into his pocket again, pulled out the microchip, held it for a second, then slid it into the slot. The light above flickered once, then stabilized. A soft hum filled the room. The cabinet unlocked with a low mechanical sound. Robert didn't open it immediately. He stood there, still, because he understood this was it, the first point, the first piece of whatever his father had built. And whatever was inside was never meant to be found by anyone else. He placed his hand on the cabinet door and pulled it open. The cabinet door opened with a slow, deliberate resistance metal against metal, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, No obvious valuables, just order. Precise. Intentional. Cold. 3 compartments. Top-shelf sealed envelopes. Thick, numbered. Each marked with a date and a 3-letter code. Middle shelf hard drives. 8 of them. Identical, matte black. No branding. Bottom shelf a small steel case. Locked. Robert didn't move right away. He stood there letting the layout settle into his mind. This wasn't storage, it was structure. Each layer meant something. Each section had a purpose. He reached for the top shelf first, pulled out the envelope labeled CWP-03. The paper felt dense, not standard office stock, deliberate. He opened it. Inside, photographs. Printed, not digital. Faces, meetings, handshakes, parking garages, private rooms. All time-stamped, all labeled. Robert flipped through them slowly. One face stopped him. Marcus Hale. Clear, sharp. Standing beside another man Robert didn't recognize. But the label underneath Caldwell and Pierce, Internal Counsel. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. Not emotional, just confirmation. Marcus wasn't just involved. He was documented, tracked, measured. Robert slid the photos back into the envelope, set it aside, moved to the next one. CWP-07. Inside, transaction logs, printed in full. Routing numbers. Shell corporations. Amounts. 7 figures. 8 figures. Repeating patterns. Dates aligning with the coordinates from the documents upstairs. Robert didn't need to read every line. He saw the structure. This wasn't isolated. It was systematic. He placed the second envelope down, then looked at the middle shelf. The hard drives, 8 of them. He picked one up, turned it over. Nothing. No label, no marking, which meant they were interchangeable or encrypted. Probably both. Robert set it back carefully, then crouched. Looked at the steel case on the bottom shelf. This one was different. Not part of the visible system, hidden inside the system. That meant it mattered more. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, held it up. The shape didn't match. Not directly, but the edges. He rotated it, flipped it. Then he saw it. The groove. Not for a standard lock, for a sliding mechanism. He inserted it into a narrow seam on the side of the case. Pushed. There was a soft click. The front panel shifted, unlocked. Robert opened it. Inside, a single file. Not digital? Paper. Thick. Bound. Black cover. No title. He lifted it out. Set it on top of the cabinet. Opened it. The first page. A name. Jonathan Williams. His father. Below it, a statement, typed, signed, dated. Robert read it slowly. Not skimming, not rushing. Every word mattered. This document exists in the event of my death under circumstances that suggest external interference. Robert didn't react outwardly, but something inside him shifted. Not surprise, recognition. His father had known. From the beginning. The materials contained within this system represent a documented network of financial and legal misconduct involving Caldwell and Pierce and affiliated entities. Robert's eyes moved faster now. Still controlled. Still precise. These records have been duplicated across multiple secure locations. Access requires all components to reconstruct the full chain of evidence. That confirmed it. This wasn't everything. Just one node. One piece of a larger system. Robert turned the page. Names, more names. Some familiar, some not. Politicians, corporate executives, legal advisors, all connected, all cross-referenced, each with dates, transactions, locations. Robert stopped on one entry. Ava Reynolds. His wife. His eyes stayed on the page. Not long, just enough. Her name wasn't at the center, not a primary node. But she was there, connected, through Marcus, through the auction, through the transfer. Robert closed the file slowly, not with anger, with clarity. She hadn't just been used, she had been part of the path, whether she understood it or not. He placed the file back on the cabinet, then looked at the rest. This was only one location, one access point. There were two more, which meant the system wasn't complete yet. Robert stepped back, took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic. Just enough. Then, he heard it. A faint sound above. Footsteps. Multiple. Not rushing, but not casual. Robert looked at the staircase. They had found him, faster than expected, which meant he had less time. He moved quickly now, but not chaotically. He took the file, placed it into the leather folder, grabbed 2 of the hard drives. Not all 8. Just enough. Then 1 envelope. CWP-03. Marcus. He closed the cabinet, removed the microchip. The hum stopped. The light flickered once, then went dark. The room returned to silence. Robert moved to the stairs, listened. Voices now. Low, controlled, professional. He stepped back into the shadows beside the wall. Waited. The door above opened. Light spilled down the staircase. 2 figures entered, different from before. These weren't just operators. They moved with more caution, more awareness. One of them spoke quietly. "He's here." The other responded. "Find him." Robert didn't move, didn't breathe deeper. He stayed still. Let them descend. 1 step at a time. When the first man reached the bottom, he moved. Fast. Precise. Not aggressive. Efficient. He stepped behind the man, pressed the edge of the metal cabinet into his back, pinned him just enough to disrupt balance, not to injure. The second man reacted instantly. But too late. Robert was already moving, past them, up the stairs, 2 steps at a time. The voices behind him sharpened. "Stop." He didn't. He reached the door, pushed it open. The night air hit him again. Cold, sharp, real. He ran, not blindly directed. Back toward the street, back toward the car. Behind him, footsteps. Faster now. Less controlled. Robert reached the corner, turned. The car was there, still parked, still waiting. He unlocked it remotely. Got in, engine on. No hesitation. He pulled out, just as one of the men reached the curb. Too late. The car merged into the empty street, disappeared into the city. Minutes passed before Robert slowed down. His hand stayed steady on the wheel, his breathing even, but his mind working faster now. The system was real, confirmed, documented, and now active again, because someone had tried to shut it down and failed. Robert glanced at the folder on the passenger seat, then at the watch on his wrist, then back to the road. 2 more points, 2 more locations. And now they knew he was moving, which meant the next step wouldn't be quiet. And for the first time, that didn't concern him, because he wasn't reacting anymore. He was leading. Robert didn't go back to the apartment. He didn't call anyone. He didn't slow down. The city moved around him. Lights, traffic signals, distant sirens, but none of it registered as distraction. Only structure. Only sequence. 3 points. 1 complete system. The first had been opened. That changed everything, because now they knew he could access it. And more importantly, they knew he would. Robert drove north along Lakeshore Drive, the skyline stretching beside him like a line of quiet witnesses. The reflection of glass towers flickered across the windshield, fragmented by motion. He glanced once at the folder on the passenger seat, then back to the road. The second location was further out. Not downtown, not hidden in plain sight. Something else. The coordinates led toward an industrial district near the edge of the city. Old warehouses, logistics hubs, places that no longer carried names people remembered, which meant less visibility, more control. Robert exited the main road, turned into a quieter grid. Streetlights grew sparse, buildings lower, older. The GPS wasn't necessary. He followed the pattern, left, right. Then a long stretch with no traffic. At the end, a warehouse. 2 stories. Brick. Windows mostly dark. A single overhead light flickered above a loading bay door. Robert parked across the street. Didn't step out immediately. He watched, counted, measured. No visible movement. No cars nearby. But that didn't mean empty. He knew that now. Robert reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a small flashlight, checked the battery, then stepped out of the car. The air smelled different here. Dust, oil, old metal. He crossed the street, stopped near the entrance. The loading bay door was partially open, just enough for a person to slip through. Not forced, not broken. Left that way. Deliberately. Robert didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. Darkness wrapped around him, thicker than before, more layered. He clicked the flashlight on. A narrow beam cut through the space. Rows of crates, stacked high. Labels faded. Some recent, some old. No clear order. Which meant the order wasn't visual. It was hidden. Robert moved slowly. The sound of his footsteps echoed slightly. Too much. He adjusted. Shorter steps. Lighter. Listening between movements. Nothing. No voices. No shifting. Just the quiet hum of an old building. He moved deeper inside. Toward the center. The coordinates weren't pointing to the door. They pointed to a position inside. Specific. Exact. He counted his steps. Matched distance. Then stopped. There was nothing there. No cabinet, no door. Just concrete floor. Robert lowered the flashlight. Ran the beam across the ground. Cracks, dust. And then a pattern. Faint. Almost invisible. A rectangular outline. Different shade, slightly raised. A panel. Robert crouched. Brushed away the dust with his hand. Edges became clearer. No handle. No obvious latch. He sat back. Thought. The first location had required the chip. The second would be different. Same system, different layer. He reached into the folder, pulled out one of the documents, the coordinates page, then flipped it. There, a smaller notation. Numbers. A sequence, not GPS. Something else. Robert looked at the panel again, then around the space. Searching, looking for symmetry. There, on the nearest crate, a small keypad. Old, industrial. Easy to miss. Not connected to anything obvious, but positioned exactly 4 feet from the panel. Too precise to be random. Robert stood, walked to it. The keypad had 10 buttons. No screen, no display, just input. He looked back at the sequence on the paper. 6 digits. He entered them, one by one. No sound, no confirmation. Then, a click, behind him. Robert turned. The panel in the floor shifted. Slowly, mechanically, revealing a recessed compartment. He walked back, shined the flashlight inside. A metal box. Smaller than the first location, but more secure. No visible lock, no slot, different again. Robert studied it, then reached for the watch, his father's watch. He turned it over, ran his fingers along the back. There, a small indentation. He pressed. The casing clicked, opened slightly. Inside, a thin contact strip, hidden, invisible unless you knew where to look. Robert looked back at the box. On its surface, a matching strip. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the watch against it, held it steady. For a second, nothing. Then a soft vibration. The box unlocked. Robert lifted the lid. Inside a tablet, not modern, not consumer grade, rugged, encrypted, powered off. Beside it, a single USB drive. And a folded sheet of paper. Robert picked up the paper first, unfolded it, typed again. His father's handwriting at the bottom, short, direct. If you're here, you understand the risk. Robert read it once, Then again, this layer contains active accounts and real-time access. Do not connect unless you are prepared to trigger a response. Robert's eyes moved to the tablet, then to the USB. This wasn't just records. This was live, active, connected to something still running, still functioning, which meant opening it would do more than reveal. It would alert. Robert stood there, still, calculating. This was the point of no return. The first location had confirmed the system. The second would activate it. He looked at the paper again, prepared to trigger a response. They were already responding. They had already sent people, already followed him, which meant the system was already partially awake. Robert folded the paper, placed it back, picked up the USB, turned it in his hand. Small, light, but carrying weight far beyond its size. He slipped it into his pocket, left the tablet where it was, for now. He closed the box, stepped back. The panel slowly slid back into place, sealing everything beneath. Robert stood in the dim warehouse, the flashlight beam steady in his hand, his mind already moving ahead. 2 points accessed, 1 remaining. The final location. And whatever his father had left there would complete the system. But now the system wasn't dormant anymore. It was watching, reacting, moving, just like the people tied to it. Robert turned toward the exit, walked back through the rows of crates. The darkness felt different now, not empty, occupied, aware. He stepped outside. The cold air hit him again. He scanned the street. Empty. For now. He got back into his car, started the engine, and as he pulled away, a single thought settled clear and precise. The next location wouldn't be hidden. It would be guarded. And this time, they wouldn't be waiting. They would be ready. The third location wasn't hidden. That was the first difference. Robert knew it before he even arrived. The coordinates led him back into the city, into the part of Chicago where glass towers replaced warehouses, where security wasn't subtle and access wasn't granted quietly. Caldwell and Pierce, LLP. Their headquarters stood 38 stories high along Wacker Drive overlooking the river. Clean lines, polished surfaces, every inch designed to project control. Robert parked across the street, engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. He didn't look up immediately. He didn't need to. He had seen this building before, dozens of times, standing beside Ava, waiting, watching, invisible. Now it looked different. Not bigger, not more powerful. Just connected. This was the final point, which meant whatever his father left here was meant to complete everything else. Robert stepped out of the car, adjusted his jacket. The leather folder stayed under his arm, the watch on his wrist, the USB in his pocket. Everything aligned. He crossed the street, entered the building. The lobby was quiet at this hour. Late. Minimal staff. A security desk near the elevators. One guard, mid-50s, routine posture. Robert approached. The guard looked up. "Can I help you?" Robert nodded. "I'm here to see Ava Williams." The name worked. It always did. The guard checked the system, paused, then nodded. "She's still in?" Of course she was. Robert didn't comment. "Elevator's unlocked for her floor," the guard said. Robert gave a small nod, walked past. No resistance, no suspicion. Because this building trusted its own, that was the weakness. The elevator ride up felt longer than it was. 38 floors, each number lighting up one at a time. Robert watched them. Not impatient, just aware. When the doors opened, the floor was almost empty. Lights dimmed, workstations quiet, glass offices reflecting faint city light. At the far end, Ava's office. Door open, lights on. Robert walked toward it. No hesitation. No noise beyond the soft rhythm of his steps. Ava stood inside. Phone in hand, mid-conversation. She looked up as he approached. Her voice stopped. The call ended. She set the phone down slowly. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Robert stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "I know. A beat. Neither should you." Ava didn't respond. Her eyes moved to the folder, then to his wrist. The watch. Still there. That detail mattered. "You went to the second location," she said. Not a question. Robert nodded once. "Yes." Silence. "Then you triggered it." Robert didn't deny it. "Yes." Ava exhaled slowly. "They know now." Robert tilted his head slightly. They already knew. A pause. Then, "Now they're reacting." He stepped further into the office, set the folder on the desk, opened it carefully. Ava watched every movement. Tension building, not loud, not visible, but present. Robert pulled out the file. The one from the first location, set it down, then the envelope. Marcus. Then the USB. Placed it beside them. 3 pieces. Incomplete, but enough. Ava didn't move closer. Didn't touch anything. "What are you doing?" she asked. Robert looked at her. "Finishing it. A beat." "This is the last point." Ava shook her head. "You don't understand," Robert cut her off. "Quietly, I do." He tapped the desk, lightly. "This is where it ends." Ava's voice tightened. "No," she said. "This is where it explodes." Robert didn't react. He walked around the desk, toward the back wall. There, a panel, glass, decorative, but slightly offset from the rest. He stopped in front of it, looked at his reflection, then reached for the watch. Ava stepped forward. Robert, don't. He didn't turn. Why her answer came faster now. Because she knew. "Because this isn't just evidence," she said. "It's leverage for people who don't lose." Robert nodded slightly. "I've noticed." He pressed the watch against the panel. Nothing. For a second. Then a soft vibration. The glass shifted, split down the center, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Ava froze, because she hadn't known. Not this part. Not this layer. Robert opened the compartment. Inside, a server module, compact, active, lights blinking steadily, connected. Still running. The final node. Robert stepped back slightly, looked at it, then at Ava. "This is the source," he said. Her voice dropped. "You don't touch that." Robert's eyes stayed on the system. "It's already been touched." Ava shook her head. "You don't understand the consequences." Robert turned to her. For who silence? That question didn't have one answer, which meant it had many. Robert stepped forward again, pulled the USB from his pocket, held it up. "This connects to it," he said. Ava's expression shifted. Not fear, recognition. "You activate that," she said slowly, "and everything goes live." Robert nodded. "That's the point. A beat. Everything becomes visible." Ava stepped closer now, urgent. "No," she said. "Everything becomes uncontrollable." Robert met her eyes. Good. Silence. Heavy. Because that word changed the equation completely. Ava looked at him. Really looked. Not the man she had dismissed. Not the husband she controlled. Someone else. Someone who had already crossed the line she was still trying to avoid. "You're not thinking clearly," she said. Robert shook his head. "No." A pause. "I'm thinking precisely." He turned back to the system, inserted the USB. The lights flickered, the hum deepened, the system responded. Ava stepped back, instinctively, as if distance could change what was happening. It couldn't. The screen embedded in the module lit up. Data streams, live feeds, accounts, transfers, names, everything connecting. Real time. Robert watched it. Not overwhelmed, not surprised. Just confirming. The system wasn't just documenting, it was tracking. Still active, still feeding, still growing. Ava's voice came out quieter now. "What have you done?" Robert didn't look at her. He reached into the folder, pulled out his phone, connected it to the system, transferred, copied, secured, not everything. Just enough. Then, he disconnected, removed the USB. The system continued running. But now he had it. Portable, controlled, distributed. He turned back to Ava. "It's over," he said. She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "It's just starting." Robert nodded. "I know." He closed the folder, picked it up, walked toward the door. Ava didn't stop him, didn't speak. Because now she understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't about winning, it was about exposure. And exposure couldn't be controlled. Robert opened the door, stepped out. The hallway was still empty, the building still quiet. But that wouldn't last. Behind him, the system was still running. And now, so was everything connected to it. Robert didn't go back to the apartment. He didn't drive far either. Just far enough. 3 blocks away from Caldwell and Pierce, he pulled into a quiet side street and turned off the engine. The city was still alive. Lights reflected in the river. Cars moved in distant lines. But inside the car, everything slowed again. The folder sat beside him, closed, but no longer unknown. Robert rested his hand on it, not gripping, just present. The system was complete now. 3 locations, 3 layers, 1 structure. His father hadn't built something to hide. He had built something to reveal only when all the pieces aligned. And now they had. Robert reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, unlocked it, scrolled once, then stopped. A single contact, saved years ago, never used. Daniel Brooks, Ava's colleague, corporate attorney, connected, too connected. Robert pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then Robert Daniels' voice. Controlled, careful, not surprised. That told him enough. "You're still at the office," Robert said. A pause. Then yes. Robert nodded. "I need 10 minutes. Silence, then. "All right." The call ended. Robert didn't hesitate. He started the car again. Daniel Brooks didn't wait in his office. He stood in the conference room instead. Glass walls, city behind him, hands resting lightly on the table. Not nervous, prepared. Robert entered without knocking, closed the door behind him. They faced each other. No Ava, no intermediaries. Just 2 men. One who had been part of the system, one who had just uncovered it. Daniel spoke first. "You moved fast." Robert set the folder on the table. "Not fast enough." Daniel's eyes dropped briefly to it. Then back. "What do you want, direct, efficient?" Robert appreciated that. He opened the folder, pulled out the file, placed it between them. Then the USB. Set it beside it. Daniel didn't touch either, but he looked, carefully, measured. "You've seen what's inside," Daniel said. Robert nodded. "Yes, a beat. And you understand what it means?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He studied Daniel instead, the posture, the tone, the absence of denial. "You were in it," Robert said. Daniel didn't react. "Not at the top," Robert continued, "but inside." A pause. Then, yes, no hesitation, no excuse, just confirmation. Robert nodded once. "I thought so." Silence. Then Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What's your move?" Robert looked at him. "Calm, not mine." He tapped the file. "The systems." Daniel frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Robert reached for his phone, unlocked it, turned the screen toward Daniel. A countdown, running. 9 minutes, 30 seconds. Daniel's expression shifted. "What is that?" Robert's voice stayed level. "Redundancy. A beat. Everything I copied tonight," he tapped the USB, "has already been duplicated." Daniel didn't move. Robert continued. 3 secure channels. He glanced at the timer. If nothing interrupts it. A pause. It goes public. Silence. Not dramatic, not loud, just absolute. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "You're bluffing." Robert shook his head. "No." He held his gaze. "I learned from someone who didn't bluff. A beat. Your problem is, he's not here anymore." That landed. Hard. Because now this wasn't negotiation, it was inevitability. Daniel exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He looked at the timer again. 7 minutes, then back at Daniel. "I want names confirmed." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You already have names." "Yes," Robert said, "but I want them verified." A pause. "On record." Daniel leaned back slightly. "You're asking me to expose everyone?" Robert shook his head. "I'm asking you to confirm what's already exposed." That was different, subtle, but critical. Daniel understood, which meant he also understood the risk. "If I do this," Daniel said, "there's no containment." Robert nodded. "I know." Silence. The timer kept moving. 6 minutes. Daniel looked at the file again, then at Robert, then at the watch, still on his wrist, still quiet, still underestimated. "You planned this," Daniel said. Robert didn't deny it. "I prepared." A beat, big difference. Daniel almost smiled, not out of humor, out of recognition. Then he reached forward, opened the file, started reading. Not scanning, not skimming. Carefully. Because now every word mattered, every confirmation mattered. Robert didn't interrupt, didn't rush him. He just watched. The room stayed quiet. The city behind them kept moving. The timer dropped. 5 minutes, 4. Daniel turned a page, then another, then stopped. His finger rested on a line. He exhaled slowly. "It's all here." Robert nodded. "Yes." Daniel looked up, met his eyes. "You realize what happens after this?" Robert didn't hesitate. "Yes." A pause. "Do you?" Daniel didn't answer. Because now the consequences weren't abstract. They were immediate. Real. 3 minutes. Daniel closed the file, sat back, looked at the timer, then at Robert. Then he spoke. Names, one by one. Clear, precise. No hesitation, no omission. Robert didn't write them down. He didn't need to. The system was already recording, already syncing, already preparing. 2 minutes, Daniel finished. Silence followed. Not relief, not fear, just finality. Robert picked up the USB, slid it back into his pocket, closed the folder. Then he reached for his phone, looked at the timer. 30 seconds. He tapped the screen, entered a code. The countdown stopped. Daniel watched, didn't speak, because now he understood this had never been about stopping the system. It had been about controlling when it moved. Robert looked at him. "It's done." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." A beat. Then, what happens now? Robert considered that. Then answered. The system finishes what it was built to do. Daniel exhaled. Which is... Robert picked up the folder, turned toward the door, paused, then said, "Tell the truth." He opened the door, stepped out, and didn't look back. 3 days later, the story broke. Not in one place, everywhere, simultaneously. Financial networks, legal firms, government oversight boards, names surfaced, transactions traced, systems exposed. Caldwell and Pierce collapsed within 48 hours. Investigations opened, arrests followed. Not all at once, but enough. Ava's name appeared, not as the center, but as part of the chain. Marcus Hale disappeared, no record, no trace. Daniel Brooks testified, publicly, carefully. And Robert did nothing. He didn't speak, didn't appear, didn't claim anything. He went back to his life. Same apartment, same routine, same quiet presence. But everything had changed. Not around him. Within him. One evening he stood by the window. City lights stretching across the horizon. The watch on his wrist, still ticking, still silent, still underestimated. He adjusted it slightly, out of habit, then let his hand fall. Time moved, as it always had. The difference was now it wasn't hidden anymore. Some truths don't need noise to be powerful. They don't arrive with shouting or chaos. They sit quietly waiting for the right moment and the right person to uncover them. Robert didn't win because he was louder, stronger, or more aggressive. He won because he was patient, because he paid attention, because he understood that truth, when properly prepared, doesn't need to be defended. It reveals itself. In life, we often underestimate quiet people, the ones who don't argue, the ones who don't react immediately. But silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's preparation. And sometimes it's the difference between reacting and controlling the outcome. Have you ever been underestimated like Robert, or found yourself holding back while others assumed you had nothing to offer? Share your story below. I'd really like to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy stories where patience wins over power, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might change the way you see silence forever.